What's up? What it do? Okay, so I am currently in Seoul, South Korea, and I am super excited to make this video because I must have watched like 20 different videos of other people who traveled to Korea during quarantine, and I was only able to apply certain pieces of other people's videos to myself just because my reasons are different than everyone else's. So I am here on a short-term 90-day or less visa as a tourist and a tourist only. So I am not studying in Korea, I'm not working in Korea, nor do I have family or friends in Korea. I am traveling by myself only for tourism purposes. So if this is also you, or if you are looking to travel but don't know the ins and outs, if you're only traveling for tourism, whatever the case may be, hopefully this video can offer some sort of guidance and be at least a little bit helpful. So what I'll do is I will put timestamps in the description below, so that way if you're looking for specific information on like what the arrival process is or what you have to put down for the Korean contact, if there's something super specific, check down below to see if there's something that applies to you, or you can watch the entire video. Also, as a note, what I'm going to do is break the videos up. So this video is going to be strictly about the travel process. So I'm a US citizen and I traveled from Pennsylvania, US to South Korea. So this is only going to be about that specific travel process. This isn't going to talk about the quarantine facility, the quarantine hotel, because that in and of itself is a different process. So I'll make a video on that process once I leave this hotel, which is in a few days. So I'll go more into that from like the time I checked in and registered to the time I left the quarantine hotel. But in the meantime, we're just going to go ahead and get started with the travel process. So again, I'm traveling 90 days or less, visa free, as a US citizen to South Korea. So in order for me to check in, and also as background, I am only staying for maybe like 30 some days. My first flight left Philadelphia International Airport on Sunday, October 3rd at 9:35 a.m. and I arrived at Incheon International Airport Monday, October 4th around like 6 p.m. And then I'm leaving South Korea on Thursday, November 4th at like 6:30 p.m. just for reference, if that makes a difference for you at all. So again, I'm going to start with the airport process, the check-in process. So I could not check in online because you have to provide the attendant with like specific information, and it's the same information that you will provide the employees when you arrive in South Korea. So for me to check in, I got to the airport, I had to provide the attendee. So I flew Delta, so this process might also be a little bit different if you take another airline. But for me, what I did was I had to check in, provide the attendee, the clerk, with my passport, confirm where I was traveling. I had to provide my visa. So the visa is a little bit different. So if you're traveling from the United States to a different country, with certain countries, South Korea specifically, for 90 days or less, you do not need a visa. However, Korea now requires you to have what they consider a visa, and that is the K-ETA. So that link, the application link, will be in the description below. But all that is when you print it out, this is what it looks like. And it is their version of a visa. You have to have that in order to get into the country. They just launched that this year. And the application process is super quick. It maybe takes like 20 minutes. You just have to provide your name, your passport information, like your date of birth, your address. You have to upload a passport photo, and the turnaround time is super quick. If I applied maybe like on a Thursday at 6 p.m., I got my application back by Friday at like 8 p.m. Again, the turnaround is super quick. I think now the application costs $15 US, but I could be wrong. I applied when it first rolled out, so I didn't have to pay for anything, so I'm not entirely sure. But again, the link for the K-ETA visa application will be down below, and you do need that to get into Korea. So I had to show the attendant at Delta Airlines in Philadelphia Airport, International Airport, that visa. And then also had to provide them with my COVID information. So you have to have a negative PCR test, which is the swab, in order for that test result to be applicable and usable. So I took 3 different tests, and what's going to be consistent with some of the other videos is the suggestion to not go to CVS just because the information that gets printed has to be super specific, and CVS does not meet those guidelines, so don't even waste your time. Of the 3 tests, I only paid for 1, and that cost me $165, and that's the test I ended up using. So it's my understanding that you have to have the PCR test taken within 72 hours of your first initial flight. So my first flight left Sunday, October 3rd at 9:35 a.m. So I took my first test at 10:30 a.m. on Thursday, September 30th. And that I didn't end up using that one, but I used a different test that I took at 1 p.m. on the same day for my check-in process, both at Philly International Airport and then in Korea as well. So that's that. The information you need to make sure that is included on the paperwork is here, right? So you have to make sure that the paperwork includes your name, and the name has to match what's on the passport. It has to, although I'm going to be specific, so my passport includes my first, middle, last. My name listed on the test result just has my first and last name. That's acceptable. It has to have your date of birth, the date and time the test was collected, the referring physician, and the type of test that you took, and that it was negative. My suggestion, which is also going to be consistent with some of the other videos, is to highlight that information just so that way when you get to South Korea, it's a little bit easier for the employees there. For me, what I did was I just did like a quick Google search for PCR tests near me and in my area. 2 of the tests ended up being taken. So the one is at CVS, and the other 2 were taken at like an urgent care that outsourced the test results to a lab. So that might be something if you're like looking for specific guidance on where to take a test. A quick Google search is perfectly fine too. Just make sure that it has to be a PCR test, not a rapid test. It has to be the swab. And the swab isn't that bad. At least for me, it wasn't that bad in Pennsylvania. The other thing I had to show in order for me to check in at Philly, in Philly, were the 2 Korean quarantine apps. So I'll link those in the description below. So I had to show the attendant all this information. He didn't collect any of it, just needed to make sure that I had it. So then I flew from Philly to Detroit, and then from Detroit to Incheon. And before I boarded the plane in Detroit to come to Seoul, I was handed a handful of paperwork. So I'm going to put some of the images of that paperwork here. But you have to fill this out before you arrive in South Korea. One of the pieces of paper is this agreement to facility quarantine, and this is going to be a little bit different. I'm not entirely certain. So this is the exact one that I got at Detroit's airport before I boarded the plane. This is like the original version I have. I don't know if you're supposed to hand this in before you board the plane or after you get off the plane. So that might look a little different for you. But you have to fill that information out. I think there may be like 4 pieces of paper you have to fill out. So then you fly from whatever location to Seoul to Korea. So once you get into Korea, and this is where, as like a quick disclaimer, this is where the process is I'm gonna streamline this and provide as much description as I can. I did not take pictures from this process on. I didn't take that many pictures just because I'm a female traveling by myself. I am a person of color, a Black female at that, and because I wasn't even certain if I was going to be allowed in because I'm coming only for tourism purposes. So I didn't want to take my chances, and I sincerely apologize, but I hope you understand. But I'm going to describe this process as thoroughly as I can, just because I know that at least when I was looking for videos, like that is what I wanted to know the most, was like, okay, you're telling me this, but like, what does it look like, you know? Um, so I totally understand, but I hope that I can describe this well enough so that way you can visualize what it looks like. So when you get off the plane, you walk through like that a short little walkway, and you're immediately, at least where I was, you immediately get into a line. And if you don't know where the line is, someone will direct you to this line. But it's going to be a long line, so it's going to be hard to miss. And in this line, when you get closer to the actual ropes section of it, there will be two different lines. So there's a line for if you are quarantining at a quarantine facility, a hotel, or if you're quarantining at a home address or at an Airbnb. Also, as a side note, I did not go through the Airbnb process. I'm quarantining at a quarantine facility, so I'm not going to use them interchangeably. Also, as a note, I had watched videos where they had described the quarantine location if you're staying like wherever the government tells you. I had heard that it was interchangeable between government facility and quarantine facility. So make sure that when you are going through these processes, these stations, that you are saying quarantine facility, just because all of the paperwork I have ever received from Korea says quarantine facility, not government facility. So just make a mental note of that as well in case you don't already know. So you get in line, and as you get closer to the ropes, you can get broken into one of two lines. So then either you're quarantining at a hotel, at a quarantine facility, or at a home or an Airbnb or something like that. I arrived at like 6 p.m., so there weren't too many people in line, and to that point, there wasn't really anyone. There wasn't anyone, in fact, going into the quarantine facility hotel line. So this is the one time I followed that herd sheep mentality, and I just stayed in that one line. I would imagine that, as during peak flight hours, they divided up just to streamline the process a little bit more. But for the sake of this, because I arrived at 6 p.m. Korean time, and because just that's it, because I arrived at 6 p.m. Korean time, it didn't really make a difference. So you go to station 1, but then when you get to station 2, that's when you're broken up as to if you're staying at a quarantine facility or if you're staying at a home address or a private residence. So don't get too hung up on that. Also, as a note, I am not fluent in Korean, so there was a very obvious language barrier. So if this is you, or if you're not super comfortable with your Korean, just make sure that like you're understanding that there's a language barrier, be very cognizant of it, and still try to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, and that in respect to that, you're providing whomever you're speaking with the correct information, and that they are entering the correct information. And you'll see why in a second. So you're sitting in line, and then you get to station 1. And at station 1, that is pretty much just your health station. That's where you hand over your COVID test, you hand over the health declaration forms that you had to fill out on the airplane, the pieces of paper that you received before you boarded. And then you also have to provide contact information where you are staying for quarantine. So if you're staying at a quarantine facility or a private residence where you're staying at post-quarantine. And then they also take your temperature. So just be mindful, like if you're wearing layers or if you're carrying a lot of bags, try not to overwork yourself, because they will take your temperature with one of the heat thermal scanners. After station 1, they also give you this form. It just explains your quarantine instructions and how to use the quarantine app number 1. So after you get to station 1, after you get through station 1, the health station, you go to, if you're a foreigner, which I'm assuming if you're watching this video you are, but I'm not going to make any assumptions. If you're a foreigner, you go to station 2. So at station 2, that's where they really dive into that quarantine app number 1 and where you are staying and your contact information and all that. So you get to the station, you talk to one of the employees there, and you have to open the quarantine app number 1. And I apologize because I forget what it's actually called, but this is also going to be linked down below. So you open quarantine app number 1, you put in your name, your passport number, super basic information, and then it's going to prompt you to enter an official ID number. And that's where you hand your phone over to the employee you're speaking with. He or she will enter their ID number, and then they enter in the other necessary information. So they will enter in the reason you're here, where you're quarantining, where you're going post-quarantine, and then your contact phone number. If you can, make sure that you, again, explicitly tell the employee why you're here, where you're quarantining. If it is a quarantine facility, make sure they know that, and then also make sure that if you're staying at a hotel after you quarantine, that they know you're staying at that hotel after quarantine. Personally, what happened was, again, there's a language barrier, and I was overwhelmed. Like, for full transparency, I was overwhelmed, and I was really trying to keep my cool, and there was miscommunication. So I told them that I was staying at a quarantine facility, but the employee had entered into the app that I was staying at a hotel entra for my quarantine facility. And that ended up being an issue once I got to my quarantine facility here, not like a huge deal. So again, when I say cross your T's and dot your I's, just make sure that what you are saying and what is being entered is correct and concise and consistent. So if you, I don't know if I said this, but if you can write it in Korean, make their job a little bit easier. If not, it's not a huge deal. They do a pretty good job collectively as you go through these processes, speaking English and trying to fully understand. So don't be like super concerned about that as well. With regards to the contact information, so this was one of the big concerns I had, because I was really afraid I wasn't going to be able to get into Korea because, again, right, I don't know anyone here. I'm not staying at an Airbnb, so it's not like you can put the Airbnb host's number down. So what I did was I got a Korean SIM card, and I put my Korean SIM card, my phone number for that SIM card, down as the contact. That's the easiest way. I know some people picked up their SIM card at the airport. I had it shipped to my house just so that way it was ready to go. So I listed my personal Korean SIM card phone number as the contact. They just ask whose phone number this is. Just be honest, tell them it's your phone number, and they will call the phone number. So I gave the man my phone number. He said, "Is this yours?" I was like, "Yeah, this is my phone number." He said, "Can I call it?" They will call it just to make sure it works. So please don't get hung up. Like, you do not have to list someone who lives in Korea currently. Sorry. So then once you go from station 1, you go to station number 3. Sorry. Oh my God, that really distracted me. Okay, so from station number 2, oh, I was right. From station number 2, you go to station number 3. And at station number 3, they really just reiterate and reconfirm everything that you had discussed at station number 2. So they go through and make sure that where you're quarantining, if it's at a facility, where you're staying post-quarantine, if you're staying at a hotel, and where the hotel or hotels are. And then they also make you re-sign that agreement to facility quarantine. Again, I don't know if this is the form that you have to turn in before you board the plane or if you hand it in to them now. Regardless, what I did was I just filled out a whole new form, and it essentially just says that you are agreeing to quarantine at a facility quarantine location. So you're just agreeing that you're willing to pay the expenses, you're willing to stay in quarantine, and you agree to not leave the facility for whatever reason. And then at that station, station number 3, they either give you one or both of these pieces of paper. I think it's just this one. And it is just signed by the official, listing the restrictions, where your restriction of residence, other restrictions, and why there is a restriction. So that's that. Station 3 is super simple. They also will ask for your passport and your visa, so make sure you have those handy and readily available. And then from Station 3, you go to Station 4, and Station 4 is your traditional immigration process. So you get to the employee, they ask for your passport, for your visa, they ask you where you're staying for quarantine, where you're going after quarantine. If you're quarantining at a quarantine facility, they give you a lanyard with like a red little sticker, a red lanyard, we'll just go with that. You take a photo and then you get fingerprinted as well. At this station, you will also get this piece of paper, which is a notice of isolation to quarantine. And it is exactly as it sounds. Again, when I say cross your T's and dot your I's, you may be a little overwhelmed through the process, but just make sure that what you have said and are saying is correct and consistent. So when I was at station number 2, the employee knew that I was quarantining at a quarantine facility, but he entered that I was staying at Hotel Entra for my quarantine location. And I'm not staying at Hotel Entra until the very end of my trip. But because that's what he entered, you'll see that the listed address, the listed place of quarantine, is Hotel Entra, because that's the hotel's address. So make sure that this printed information is correct and that you are actually staying at a facility here. But once you go through traditional immigration, that's super simple. Then you go through baggage claim, and baggage claim is as easy as it sounds. You just grab your bags and leave that area. Before you leave baggage claim, you have to hand over, there's going to be a gentleman sitting at like the exit, and you just have to give him your traveler declaration form, and that's the same form that you were given at the airport before boarding the flight to Korea. So that's super simple. And then once you leave baggage claim, there's like an open area, and this is the area where, like, if you have family or friends in Korea, they would wait for you and meet you. So this area right at the entrance of the open area is station number 5, and station number 5 essentially just is making sure that you are listed that as station number 5 essentially just lists that you are staying at a quarantine facility and that you were at the airport. So you just give the person your passport and your boarding pass, and you'll be directed where to go to. So like if you have a red lanyard, I was directed all the way to the right. So don't worry about that. Employees and staff will direct you where to go. So I gave, at station number 5, gave the gentleman my passport and my boarding pass, and then it was directed into this little waiting area with like 15 other people. From there, if you are quarantining at a facility, you are directed to station number 6. And at station number 6, you can either go to the left or to the right. I had a red lanyard, so I went to the right. I had a red lanyard, so I went to the left. And this one, it was an officer. Everyone else throughout the process is a quarantine employee or an airport employee, but this specific person was an officer, in case that makes a difference at all. But at station 6, you do the same thing. You provide your boarding pass, you provide your passport, and then you go into their waiting area, so a second waiting area, to wait for the shuttle that will take you to your quarantine facility. And this second waiting area is a little bit different. There are like makeshift walls enclosing this waiting area. And I must have waited maybe like 45 minutes before I was able to get on the shuttle with one other person to the quarantine hotel facility, which I'm at now. So that wasn't too bad. I didn't leave that part of that that waiting area either. I would imagine that if you had to go to the bathroom or something, you could ask an official to escort you, but I didn't do that again. Didn't want to take my chances. So that's pretty much it with the airport process itself. In another video, I'm going to go through the actual quarantine hotel process. So then just the last part of this video is just going through the SIM card and the contact number and information. So again, you can totally list yourself as the contact. You do not have to list someone who lives in Korea as your contact person for any of these documents when you arrive at the airport. My suggestion is to order a SIM card online before you leave, or before you leave for Korea. Buy a SIM card online. I bought mine off of, I think, Trazy.com. The link will be below. I do it that way. I think it makes it easier. I know other people have said in other videos that they picked it up at the airport and they were escorted to go pick it up. I didn't want any issues. I wanted to make sure that my phone number worked the second I got there. So I ordered it online, and what you do is you go online. They have different plans for your SIM card. So I bought the most expensive one, of course. I went a little OD just because I wanted to make sure that I had enough data. That's super important to me. So just be considerate and mindful of like how much you will use when you pay for this. I paid $120 for a SIM card that has like X amount of calls, X amount of texts, unlimited data, and then once you use a certain amount of data, you which doesn't really make sense, but like you have unlimited data at X amount of speed, but once you use a certain amount of data, then you will be able to use like X amount of megabytes per whatever. It sounds, I do not work in IT, so I apologize. But just know that what I bought was essentially the data heavy plan, just because I wanted to make sure if I couldn't connect to Wi-Fi and I needed to know how to get from one store to another, I could use my data and have no issues there. So again, that cost me like $120. The turnaround time was super quick too. I think maybe from the time I ordered the SIM card and the time it got to my house, it maybe only took like a week and a half. I don't know what shipping delays look like now, but the turnaround time was super quick. And you get it in a package. It's not this package, but this is what it comes in. So you get this SIM card. This is my old SIM card. You get this SIM card. Sorry, this thing with the SIM card that would actually be like here. And it has like the website, your SIM card phone number, the serial number, and all that information there. And then you also get these two pieces of information, these two pieces of paper. And this one specifically has the information you need to activate the phone and how to use it. This part particularly is super important when you land in Korea. So what I did was, I have two phones currently. So I have my Korean SIM card in this phone, and then I have my US SIM card in a second phone. If you have the luxury and if it's something you would be interested in, you could consider using two phones. There are, of course, implications with using two phones in and of itself. But I did that just because I wanted to make sure that I had access to someone in case the Korean SIM card didn't work. Of course, you can just interchange the SIM cards if you need to, if you're only using one phone, but I have two phones. So what I did was I bought the SIM card maybe like a month or two before I left for Korea, and I put it in this phone when I was still in the United States. Shocker, this Korean SIM card will not work in the United States. It will only work if you're in Korea. So I couldn't use it, so I didn't really know if it worked. So in order for me to test the phone, what I did was when I landed in Korea, the second I landed, I turned my phone on or took it off airplane mode, and I texted my mom. I was super lucky and super grateful. I landed around 6 p.m. So Eastern Standard Time, that would have been like 5 a.m. and my mom was up. So I texted her, she texted me back, so I knew that the phone worked. If you have someone you can text or call, please make sure you do that when you land, just because, God forbid, you don't want to get to station number 2, the employee calls the number and the number doesn't work. Also, make sure, again, you follow these instructions, because that's how it tells you to accurately activate the SIM card. So that's that. Again, you do not need, when an employee at the airport asks for a contact information or someone's contact information, it does not have to be someone living in Korea. It can be, and it is totally fine if you put in your phone number from the SIM card you received, as long as it is the Korean SIM card. That's totally fine. And in fact, I have been getting, I've received a call and a text from immigration about my quarantine status, and then I also, at like 11 a.m. every day, have received an automated government phone call just asking about my quarantine status, if I've had a sore throat or a headache or anything like that. So do not be worried about that, because that's what I was super worried about, was who to put for the Korean contact. In terms of like how I use my phone, so I try not to text or call on either phone, just because I don't want those international charges. So I use WhatsApp to text my mom and my family, and anyone else for that matter. If you're on Wi-Fi, you can obviously like still make calls if you have an Apple product. And then for my friends, I just talk to them through like Instagram DMs or something like that. So there are, of course, with technology, other means you can use besides like just texting someone. Aside from that, I think that's everything with the phone. So just make sure that you allow yourself enough time to make sure that you can get it shipped to your house, if that's the option you're choosing, which is what I would recommend at least. So I'm gonna end it here. I don't think there's anything else outstanding that I've missed with regards to the airport process specifically. Of course, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I will do my best to answer any and all of them. I will also make another video with regards to the quarantine facility process, so stay tuned for that. And if there's anything else I can help with in the meantime, again, please feel free to reach out, and I'm totally happy to help. Until then, see you!